Hey folks, welcome into the BN Cubs podcast. I'm Brett Taylor. That's Michael Cerami. We are brought to you here courtesy of our generous sponsors at Ankin Law, 312-6 million, injury law made personal. Make sure you're checking out Ankin Law, okay? If you got some needs, that's where you want to go. We're going to talk some Cubs here as the World Series is on the precipice now. Blue Jays have gone up 3-2. Series goes back to Toronto, which means, by the way, that the Major League Baseball season in 2025 will have started outside the United States and finished outside the United States. Just thought that was kind of an interesting little tidbit.
This is the thing we're fighting against to try to make this country great again.
I know we're exporting our baseball
national pastime
overseas. Need some tariffs to bring the games back.
There you go.
So a few things wanted to talk about that, and then we'll get into some transaction stuff later. Let's start with Trey Yesavage, because that was sort of, I think, the biggest story in Game 5, and I think there's some interesting Cubs adjacent convos that could have been. I mean, I'll say it up front, watching him perform this postseason has definitely given me an extra pang of wistfulness that we didn't get to see Cade Horton pitching in the postseason. Now, I'm not saying he's as dominant as Yesavage has been or would be. That's not what I'm saying. But I do think the Cubs would have, let the leash off, and I think Horton would have been able to eat as much as he could, and I think we probably would have seen some really good performances,
or at least just some like really fun publicity, like Yesavage is getting. So one of my friends texted me saying like a sad face that he's having the postseason he was hoping Cade Horton was going to have, and then that's kind of what you said, but that's exactly spot on.
Yeah. And I think it made me curious. The whole thing has made me curious if the Cubs had a pitching prospect of the caliber of Yesavage. It almost makes me think, now I'm going to get shredded by, prospecting types for saying this, but like the dominance that he was showing in the lower minors in the sort of rapid ascent, it reminded me a bit of Jackson Wiggins this year. Okay. Just in terms of what he was doing. And so there is a bit of a parallel that you could say, if the Cubs had someone like Yesavage, who, by the way, was just drafted last year, he was making his pro debut this season, started at low A, made a few starts, then high A, made a few starts, double A, triple A. And then he was up with the Blue Jays, not until mid-September.
Yeah.
Aside there, he gets like 2 weeks of service time for all this that he's doing, by the way. Hopefully he gets a nice World Series share, though.
Yeah.
But it just made me wonder, like, how would the Cubs handle something like this? Like, would someone asked me on Blue Sky, I think they were just curious, like, where would Yesavage have finished the season if he were a Cubs pitching prospect? And I had to be honest. I was like, I think it's possible he might have ended the year at double A.
Oh, yes, 100%. I mean, it's kind of like Cam Smith. Similar conversation that we had.
Oh yeah, that's a good question. Like, where would he be this year? Yeah,
and it is what it is. But here's something I'll say about this. That I think this is a possible beginning, because he's not the first. I feel like we've seen this like a little bit more lately.
Rare,
Cam Smith,
I know what
Cam
you're
Smith being one.
Yeah.
So here's a thought. About 5 to 10 years ago, I'll say, baseball started trending towards younger players. I think a lot of that was a cynical way to save money, and realizing that you can get the same sort of performance from a 22, 23-year-old rookie that you could a 33, 34-year-old free agent who you might sign. And that part of that is true. I think that's true. But I think we're also realizing that young players, that aging curve is just, it's more important than we realized. It's kind of like the second and third time through the order for a starter. Like, they're like, no, we understand how this works
seriously.
now. Like, for real. Now,
and the preparedness, sorry, you keep going, but the preparedness of younger players, I think, is in the way they're training through their teenage years, I think is different too.
Very different. I do think it would be fun and interesting and good for baseball, though, so that was like the first step forward, right? Is it possible we're on the precipice of the very beginning of another step forward in mentality, where it's like, you know what? No, some of these guys don't need to be doing all of this in the minors for as long as they are. Now, I was starting to formulate this thought in my head, and I'm gonna throw it to you to see how you feel about it. Yesavage, a pitcher versus a hitter. My first reaction is thinking, well, a hitter is going to definitely need more time because catching up to major league pitching is like something you need to ease your way into, right? But at the same time, pitchers, it kind of cuts both ways, because if you have all your pitches, maybe you could just start performing, right? The question is, though, a lot of guys are like, when you're drafted, especially if you're younger or out of high school or foreign born player. But if you're a college pitcher, you might have everything. A lot of these guys, though, don't have their third pitch, right? They might have, a great heater because everyone can throw a fastball. And then they have one breaking pitch. And it's like, well, that's enough to be Ben Brown for 8 weeks, but are you going to be able to stick longer term? And I think that might just become a question of like when you need a guy or how you plan to use them. So do you think like a pitcher or hitter is more likely to make a jump, like a quick ascent?
Well,
the way Yesavage did, or
for the reasons you said at the outset, I would, have always leaned pitcher, because you're in control of your sort of what you're doing out there. But then, we forget, because he came up pretty early and it wasn't a Cam Smith story. Nick Kurtz was drafted last year and came up early for the Athletics and exploded. And he certainly, he was always seen, as this tremendously impressive, projectable college hitter. But like, I don't know, I think back 10, 15, 20 years and, Ryan Zimmerman, anybody remember Ryan Zimmerman? He did that. And it was like a story. The fact that he came up the year after he was drafted and like contributed.
Harper probably did it too, right? He was like 19.
He was, maybe, I have to look. He was younger, obviously. Zimmerman was a college player, and Harper, he was sort of like a half college player because he went to that like JUCO. But like it was really rare. Like it was sufficiently rare for a young guy to come up in that first pro season. Well, after a partial year after the draft, that it was a big story. And now, it isn't that uncommon that we see guys the year after they're drafted come up.
Yeah.
And very rarely you see it the same year that they're drafted.
Nico was it was an emergency, but it was the September of his September first after season.
His, yeah. Yeah. Well, look at the Angels, right? The Angels have been getting, listen, I'm not going to point to the Angels as a model run franchise, but to your point that we're seeing it more and more, the last 2 years, they have almost pioneered an approach where they're being ultra aggressive, not only with bringing guys up. Zach Neto, was up on the big league roster. He was like the Cam Smith of a couple of years ago, but also just starting guys in the minors at like AA. And I think the question that this raises is there's two things you think about when you talk about a very young player coming up to the big league level. It's one, is he ready to contribute to wins at the big league level? And two, what is the impact on development for the long term, pro or con, if you're bringing a guy up? And I wonder, as like you said, I just wonder if teams are realizing, oh, maybe we've had that balance a little either wrong before, or players have just changed and now we can be more aggressive.
Yeah, well, both. And it's also possible. Here's something that I'm sort of thinking as you were working your way through that. Is it possible that like, if player X was going to struggle against fastballs, he was going to struggle maybe only a little bit worse at AAA than he was at high A. And it's like, so just go straight to triple. Like maybe that struggle period, that developmental period isn't, very different. And that's why you could say, well, we don't need to have him there. He could just jump up. And, again, it's hard to say that with a total straight face, because we've seen the jump to the big leagues be incredibly difficult for Pete Crow-Armstrong, Matt Shaw. Every prospect, a lot of thousands of prospects have had that problem and then have overcome it and become great players. And it's hard to say like their work in the minors didn't mean anything, but I do think it would be very exciting for the sport if like every other sport, the guys you draft are going to have, a more tangible impact on the team in the next 1 year, as opposed to 3 to 4. And Go on.
Can I ask you, because I was wondering that was sort of like the undercurrent of this whole conversation, because like we know that that's part of what makes the NFL draft and NBA draft so compelling. Does it matter? Say that baseball got to a place where guys were coming up like Yesavage the next year a lot. Is there really a difference between coming up the next year or 2 or 3 years in terms of making the draft exciting? Like are fans more excited?
I think so.
Oh, he's going to be up in 16 months versus how, I don't know. I feel like it's still not quite enough immediacy for it to matter.
I think so. I think it's a big deal, and I'll take it one step further. I think it's a big deal in isolation to have a guy who you go, this guy might help us next year. I mean, think about how much different we would have felt about, I'm going to get to my second point, but how much different we would have felt about Cam Smith if we were told for certain he's going to be on the big league team next year. That's a gigantic difference. It's like, okay, where does this guy fit in? And even in the NFL draft and the NBA draft, there are guys who are not expected to be the top contributor. Obviously, if you draft a quarterback first overall, you're expecting him to play, but like there's guys who are in basketball, they're like the 6th, 7th, 8th guy, or like in football, they're RB2 to start the year, but you're like, he could possibly, but they're playing and they're contributing and there's a chance. So imagine that. And then imagine this, the new CBA happens and they allow teams to trade draft picks. Now you're talking about the ability to trade draft picks for players who might contribute the next season. I mean, that makes the draft a whole new thing. I mean, that would change it entirely and make it much more important. And I think both things should happen. I think both would be good for the sport. And I hope that we do see a change like that. I'm sure there's unexpected consequences of draft pick trading that I'm maybe not considering, but I think it's fun. We see it in other sports. It's like, let's do it.
Well, and other changes to the CBA too could, pile on to this, where if you had like shrink the number of years before a player has to go on the 40-man, or you shrink the years for free agency, or you shrink the years for minor league free agency, all of that could accelerate teams to being like, okay, we need to draft. It's not just that we need to accelerate our promotion of prospects, is we need to draft guys thinking, oh, who's going to be ready more quickly. And okay, we can leave it there. It's a good combo though. And big tip of the cap to Yesavage, because I mean, it's one thing for it to be an interesting story, but it's another to think about, no, this kid was playing college baseball last year, and now he's dominating the Dodgers in Los Angeles in the World Series. Like, good. That's cool. Good for him. Good for the Blue Jays. Speaking of World Series stuff, let's talk about, dude, I knew this was going to happen before we were recording. I knew this. And I put my 3 fingers up so I could count them down and remember the 3 things I wanted to talk about. Ohtani was the one, but was there one that was more World Series? Oh, Cubs as a contender.
Let's do it, because it's like our little like Chicago media conversation.
Yeah, let's do that one, and we don't have to hang on too much, because I do want to talk about the Ohtani thing. Okay, so I saw a segment with apologies. Didn't listen to it because that for me wasn't really the point. But at 670 The Score, talk radio, much like podcasts, you got to find stuff to jaw about. So I get it. They were having the annual conversation, how close are the Cubs to being a World Series contender? And I had, and as I always do, 2 reactions to that. One is a general one, which is I just kind of hate that conversation in baseball, because it's as correct as that conversation is in football and basketball, where there is to me at least, there's a pretty big difference between a playoff team and a championship team. Like, you can see that difference.
The Bulls were a playoff team like a bunch of times.
Exactly. Like, nobody was confusing them for a team that was going to make a real run, unlike this year's team. So make sure you read Bleacher Nation's Bulls coverage.
Eli's been killing it.
I know.
He's been great. People are starting to pay attention too.
Well, I can relate to the idea that it's invigorating from a coverage perspective to finally be like, oh, team is good. He's been in the wilderness for a while.
For those who Eli's such a great writer, and he's just had to cover not just bad teams, because Brett and I have covered bad
it's worse teams. Than covering a bad team.
It's way worse than covering a bad team. They are a miserable organization. But youth movement and they're winning, and Kobe's not back yet. So it's like, all right, let's see what's going on. Anyway.
So
World
that
Series
was one
contender.
thing, is there's a difference in NBA, NFL, and baseball. So I just don't love that conversation generally. And then my second reaction was, well, depending on, I mean, are we playing with the word contender? Because the Cubs were a game away from the NLCS. So by definition, they were a contender this year. And so unless you want to have the conversation, are they going to fall off so horribly next year that they aren't a realistic threat to make the NLCS, then like, what even does the conversation look like? How close are they being contender? They're sitting on top of it. That's how close.
Yeah. So I have a couple thoughts on this. I knew we were going to talk about this and it's a fun thing to talk about. You want to know what I think breathed life into that question for so many people is the reality of what you just said is they were a contender this year. Because of course they were. But here's the difference. And we've talked about this once in the past. I think when people say that, it's kind of like the conversation about like batting around, right? And it's like when you say it and when it's actually accurate. So setting aside that argument, because we'll go off on tangent forever. What the Cubs were not this year was like a clear, obvious relative to multiple seasons. Okay. Think about teams that are think about all the 30 teams in baseball over multiple seasons. There was no team this year to me that stood out as like we talked about super awesome team. Everyone, all the best teams were just like pretty good teams with flaws, including the Dodgers. They had like their issues throughout the season, and the Brewers, who were not the best team, had the best record. And so there was no like great team this year. And so I would say like in the most generous explanation of what they were saying, there was no like World Series contender this year. There was like no team that was like the team, the 2016 Cubs, the insert any other team that you want that follows them. There's 100 of them. And so to that end, it's like, I sort of get what you're saying. They weren't like this steamrolling behemoth, but that's just not how it works in baseball. And this year, relative to the other teams, they were of course a World Series contender. So like, I didn't like have such a visceral reaction to that as a lot of people did, because maybe I was just the way I was interpreting it was like, yeah, I get what you're saying. Like they didn't go into spring training as like, oh, this is going to be, for example, what the Dodgers should have been this year, arguably.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like that was like, oh, they're a World Series contender day one. Everyone knows what they are, what they should be.
Yeah. I think the issue is there's an implication when you ask that question in late October, after the Cubs have bowed out of the playoffs and the World Series happening. The question is almost like, what do the Cubs need to do this offseason to be a quote World Series contender? That's like really the meat of that question when you're doing it now. And I just think there's better questions, like I don't think, and I know the Cubs would agree. Actually, the two teams in the World Series right now are perfect examples of what I was just going to say. Think of what's making the Blue Jays so good right now. Okay. One of the things we just talked about, it's Trey Yesavage coming up and being incredible and dominant. That isn't something they did last offseason to become a World Series contender. That's a thing that played out late in the year. Okay. Yeah. Similarly, they traded for Shane Bieber at the deadline. That is not something that was like, what do you need to do in October and November to, the Dodgers, a lot of their pitching just got healthy. That was it. That's the whole difference. They were a barely 500 team in the second half of the season. People forget that. And it's like, no, but just when October rolled around, they got really healthy. Blake Snell started clicking and just a lot of things came. Oh, Shohei Ohtani got stretched out. There was
also doing ridiculous things.
Also, and a lot of that was deliberate. Like I'm not taking away credit from the Dodgers.
Well, but to be fair, a lot of that is the Dodgers. They signed all those guys.
Yeah, I mean they have. Yes, yeah. Oh, for sure. I'm also not saying that they aren't World Series contenders. Whatever that is. I'm only saying that, like, to me, the better conversation for now is simply. And I'm going to sound like Jed and Craig Counsell.
I was about to
say the question is, how do we win
against this? I
don't
we win,
like
that though.
Yeah. How do we win 92 games next year?
But that does suck still. I don't.
And Well, then let's get to the root of that. The root then is, okay, throw away winning 92 games. The question is, how do you win in the playoffs? Would be like,
no,
and I don't
disagree.
think that's a worthwhile. Okay, good.
That is not. I agree with you on that. The question should be, how do you become the first or second seed? Because that is how you are a World Series contender.
Yes.
And that is
Agreed.
that is the thing. And winning 92 games, like, I actually understand the logic of what they're saying when they say that, but that's not the playoff format we have anymore. You need to be a first or second seed. You need to. It is a gigantic advantage.
The Dodgers were not, but
I understand that you can't. First of all, the Dodgers had a $380 million payroll. So
there's another way to do it. Yeah.
So that's one thing, but I'm saying even if you can get there, the goal in my mind, the goal should be to be a first or second seed to get a first round bye in the playoffs.
Yes, if you're as good as the Cubs could be, right? Like 2 years ago, we wouldn't have said the realistic offseason goal.
But I'm saying,
right now,
as the goal, right? You know what I mean?
Right now, it should be absolutely.
But I don't think that they think about it that way, and there might be math and reasons that they don't, but I don't think that they do. And to put an even finer point on this, we were happy with how the season ended. We had a whole podcast about talking about, like, hey, you know what? They got to game 5. They battled back. They had a playoff series win. If they came very close, lost in the wild card round, disaster. You know what I mean? It's like, well, that's why you don't try to win 92 games.
Right.
So it was fortunate that didn't happen. And I think that they were the better team. And I think that they should have beat the Brewers, honestly. And if things happened a little differently, maybe they could have.
Yeah,
but for sure. It's, but I'm just saying, I do think that the goal needs to be, how are we an on paper first or second seed on day one? Not World Series contender, because that is meaningless. And once you get to the playoffs, yeah, all bets are kind of off, but all bets are off relative to the level of the round you're in. And
right. Chop off the first round. You get to chop a whole round off.
And to say nothing of setting up your rotation, resting your arms. I mean, think about if Matthew Boyd was able to go on full rest and was a little bit healthier, better. It could have been a very different series. It really could have.
Well, and because you say that, I want to end with one last point, because I know people are thinking this. We aren't saying that there aren't things that the Cubs could and should do in constructing their roster for 2026 that would also help in the postseason, like having another really impactful starting pitcher. Like, we're not saying that's good anyway. We're just saying you don't necessarily specifically focus on things that supposedly help you win postseason games when you're constructing a team. You just want to win as many games as possible in the regular season to set up the rest. And yes, the Cubs need an impact starting pitcher this offseason. We'll get to that in a bit too. All right. Last thing before we get to the transaction corner is there was a report this week from Jon Heyman that when the Shohei Ohtani sweepstakes were playing out, there were 5 sort of reportedly finalist teams that we were pretty much aware of at the time. Dodgers, Blue Jays, Cubs, Giants, Angels. And ultimately, of course, Ohtani picks the Dodgers, which was what everyone expected at the time. And he signs this 10-year, $700 million contract with 97% of it deferred, and like very far deferred, such that the value is only $450 million. The story at the time, as far as it related to the Cubs, was not so much, it really wasn't even about that structure. It was what was the Cubs offer? Oh, it was under 500 million, but so it could have been worth more than what he took from the Dodgers. And that's kind of as far as it went. It was sort of, he's probably going to pick the Dodgers and whatever. Well, Heyman's report is that he doesn't exactly say this, but I read it as the implication that Ohtani and his camp basically told those 5 teams, the structure we want is the one that he got from the Dodgers. $700 million over 10 years, but most of it heavily deferred. Talk to your financial advisor if you want to know why that would be a preferred setup. I mean, there's some tax potential benefits for Ohtani that are being challenged by the state of California as we speak.
Right.
But of course, I'm sure he would have preferred $700 million on day one. It's not like it's better, but what Heyman reports is that the Giants, Blue Jays, and Dodgers were willing to engage on that contract structure, and the Angels and the Cubs were not. And that's all. That's it. That's all he says. I won't claim to put my stamp of approval on that report, but that's the report. And I will throw it to you, Michael, to get your reaction to when you saw that report, and then we can talk about implications.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna let you do the unpacking of why this report coming out and why it coming out now might have some value to the league that wasn't otherwise apparent, and it's sort of like an undercurrent of this entire story. But I want to try to silo that off from just the Cubs implication here, because I do want to talk about when Ohtani signed with the Dodgers. I had sort of initially two reactions, and it was like, of course it was the Dodgers. And hey, it looks like the Cubs really gave it a fair shot. Like they might have given him an offer that was legitimately competitive with the offer he ultimately signed, including the deferrals and the lack of deferrals in the Cubs. But this paints a different picture. So taking it at face value for 1 second, it seems to me that we can no longer say the Cubs did all that they could to sign Ohtani, because in effect, they they bounced themselves out of this sweepstakes. They declined to meet
according to the
demands,
report. Yeah.
According to the report. I'm saying, if you take it at face value, they said, we are taking ourselves out of the running for Shohei Ohtani, despite being one of only 5 teams he would theoretically approve a deal with. Okay. So that bums me out. And there's the slight exit, the slight off ramp there for the Cubs front office. What that they could have said was like, well, this was a $700 million deal, so we couldn't possibly spend that much money. But it wasn't. And if it was, because it's not how it works with the deferrals. So now it's like, so it wasn't the money, it was the structure of the deal. And that's stupid. That is an incredibly stupid outcome. And to be fair, I do not think that Ohtani was going to sign with the Cubs, even if they did make this offer. Yeah. I think he was always going to end up with the Dodgers. And so, in effect, the point might be moot, but that is not what I do not think that is what Jed Hoyer and Tom Ricketts were contemplating when they did this. They didn't go, well, we made him an offer that's worth more money, but he wants this structure and he's going to sign with the Dodgers anyway. So no, thanks. No, they clearly said we're out. And that's pretty ridiculous, because as we've seen, Shohei Ohtani is pretty much living up to it. Now his deal looks not cheap,
a bargain,
but like
a bargain,
pretty damn good, especially including all of the revenue that he generates. But just look at Vladimir Guerrero Jr. and Juan Soto, what they got. It's Shohei Ohtani. Like, it's insane. It's insane that you would take yourself out of this at any level, let alone a level that is theoretically less money that you are willing to spend, right, just because of the structure. And then the question that I want to bounce to you, and we kind of talked about, but I'm willing to say it if you won't, is what's the deal? Why are you so against deferrals that it's one thing to be so against them in general, but to be against them for Ohtani, if there was ever a time to make an exception. So is there any way, again, silo off the it's convenient timing for this report.
Yeah.
The Cubs took themselves out on a deal that was theoretically worth less money or equal money than what they were willing to do based on structure only, according to this report.
Because you could argue, and I'm not a financier, but you could argue if you were willing to pay out $450 million over the first 10 years, well, set that money aside each year as the first 10 years go along, and then you'll have the deferral money available.
Yeah, exactly. It's the same thing.
Now, that said, there's a reason, right? Like, we don't have it at the tip of my tongue. We can make broad proclamations like it's a ton of money to have on your books as a future liability. Okay, maybe if you were afraid, I don't know, that like the CBA and the changing TV landscape and these things were like fundamentally going to uproot your ability to operate your business in ways that aren't going to happen to the Dodgers, which this is fair to say because their TV deal through Charter, who's like just an ironclad company, there's no risk to theirs whatsoever. That those aren't apples and apples. Okay, fine. Beyond that, people have wanted to, I've seen people replying, they're speculating about, they want to preserve the possibility of a future sale. And you don't want to have a bunch of
that's what I think.
Owed money on your books. I don't know enough to argue against that. I think the counter argument to the Cubs, to the Ricketts, essentially, if that was the position, is but you'd have a Shohei Ohtani.
Exactly.
You don't think that helps the value of your organization?
Just him alone in revenue and in his face, but also you will be a better team because he's maybe the greatest baseball player ever. Right. so
that's why I don't.
A little weird.
But
even the conversation you were saying about, like, again, if they were unwilling, if their top offer was $400 million over 12 years, and like, that's just literally the most money we have. But by all general accounts, they were willing to do a deal that was monetarily, consistent with the deal he got, just in a different structure. Thus, it's the only variable there is the structure. And so, and I have a hard time understanding.
Well, these are Tom Ricketts, like, literally was in finance, and so I have to believe there's some, like, if we were sitting down with them and if they would ever share the deep, dark particulars, they'd be like, well, here's why. There are certain assumptions about the economy and about, like, what this is happening, this, and how we want to be able to do this, and how they might maybe want to invest in other sports franchises, and you don't want to be too over levered, and, like, there's a reason. That's all we know is there's a reason that goes beyond, I think, their general resistance to deferring money and doing super long deals. Ricketts has addressed that a little bit, just saying they don't like to have massive future obligations on the books if they can avoid it.
Instead, Ohtani is hitting 3 homers, striking out 10, and going 6 scoreless innings, and then going 4 for 4 with 2 doubles, 2 homers, and 5 walks in an 18-inning marathon World Series game for the Dodgers.
And single-handedly. Yeah. Like, so Addison, I was just about to say this, Addison is hitting us up, our producer. According to June Lee, the Dodgers have already made back the $700 million from Ohtani in tickets and marketing and merchandise in the US and Japan. They've reached major partnerships in Japan and tourism. From Japan to the city of LA has increased by 90%. Now, LA is a little bit uniquely situated for some of that stuff in the ways Chicago might not be, but it is like, it's 100 million annually in added revenue, above what, a normal star would generate for an organization. And it's, anyway, last thing on this, and you alluded to it. I do think, and I want to be careful how I phrase this, because I'm not alleging anything, but any major story like this about the financial operations of the game that comes out from now until December of next year, you need to filter through the lens of, okay, whom does this help or hurt in the potential CBA discussions? Because there are billions of dollars at stake in these things. So yes, like, the media is going to be participating, knowingly or unknowingly, in this negotiation. And it occurs to me that as the World Series was playing out, one of the big talking points is about how the Dodgers can do things that other franchises can't because of their cache of money that teams just don't have. And so, like, landing Ohtani, landing Yamamoto, landing Roque Sasaki, other teams can't do it, is what the argument is, right? And so for when stories come out that are like, I saw a report about how, Sasaki almost didn't choose the Dodgers, and Yamamoto was maybe really interested in going elsewhere, and these 5 teams all had the same opportunity to sign Ohtani. They totally equal opportunity. It's not hard to imagine that, as true as all those stories might be, they also do help 2 constituencies in this discussion. It can help the league insofar as it doesn't want to have this perception of competitive imbalance in its sport, especially as larger market owners. It doesn't want that. But it also arguably helps the Players Association because they don't want a salary cap. And you know what one of the big arguments in favor of a salary cap would be? Look at what the Dodgers are doing with their $380 million payroll. They're ruining the sport. They're buying all the good players, and it's not competitive. If you're able to say, hey, other clubs could have gotten that same deal with Ohtani and simply chose not to do it, well, then a salary cap doesn't matter and it wouldn't change anything. And so it's a story that plays well in a lot of ways.
No, I follow you on that. I mean, and this is sort of a sidebar, but I feel like the thing that I feel like people miss this a lot when they talk about the Dodgers like ruining the sport. I feel like a lot of times they focus on Ohtani because to me, it's really more Yamamoto because he was a much bigger gamble and they gave him the biggest pitching contract in
that's a really good
MLB history.
They could afford to take such a huge risk.
That was a gigantic risk. Turns out it was a smart one, right? But that was like, no one knew. Like it wasn't quite the same thing, right? Yamamoto's awesome. And Ohtani, we knew though what he could do, what he could generate, what he was capable of. But like giving $325 million to Yamamoto was like
plus $50 million posting fee.
Yeah. When that happened, I was like, yeah, I mean, that is a Dodgers only move. That is the one.
Yeah. And then there's a bunch at the margins of their roster. Like when they, pick a contributor, Kirby Yates, where it's like, well, they can offer him $3 million more than any other.
Or
team.
they trade for Glass now and just immediately extend him
because it's nothing to them.
It doesn't matter, and then they get to keep him, and it's just changes changes the landscape of the trade market for the Dodgers because you can feel so much more confident that you're going to be able to extend a guy, which is not what you're trading for, but it can be baked into it a little bit. Like, no, we're going to get to keep him. It doesn't matter. We're just going to pay him whatever he wants.
And if he busts after that, it doesn't hurt us as much.
Yeah.
And then arguably it also helps with things like Sasaki, where he's choosing among teams on the same contract, essentially, right? Although he got a little less from the Dodgers.
Yeah.
Because the more you build up one organization and you consolidate, then they become more attractive to the guys who have choices, which is not, none of this is the Dodgers' fault. Like,
no, it's just smart.
They're just doing what they can.
The Cubs are trying to do what I was about to say is like, you know what a type of imbalance that the league needs to maybe start thinking about is, can the Dodgers be can they get every Japanese superstar? And if that's true, that's a problem for baseball.
Yeah, it's probably not good for MLB.
It's not good for them to, but to be fair, the Cubs have gotten a few over the years. Showed us Fukudome. I mean, there's been others too, but like, and part of that is like building up that trust and familiarity with those players and that culture and that country. But like, Ohtani, Sasaki, Yamamoto, if there's like a bunch more and they all only want the Dodgers, whether they're paying them Yamamoto money or their Sasaki deals where they like have a limited option of financial differences, it's a problem if it's going to be the Dodgers every single time. And that's, geography plays a role, but like it's a downward slope where it's like, it could just keep going that way. And it's, maybe you need to talk about caps on, international drafts, or I don't know,
the KBO,
budgets for international free agency, I don't
Korea,
know.
You can have 3 international players on your roster.
There you go.
I'm not saying MLB would do that.
No,
exactly,
they shouldn't do that, but
it has been done. There are versions. Yeah. Okay. All right. I'm good to move on to,
Yep. This week's Transaction Corner is brought to you by Feldco, the home renewal experts. Bleacher Nation is proud to partner with Feldco. For almost 50 years, Feldco has been transforming Chicagoland homes with their windows, siding, doors, and roofing. Feldco is family-owned and prides themselves in delighting their customers. With products made in the U.S. and designed specifically for the Midwest, Feldco offers the perfect balance of beauty and energy efficiency. I like to speed up as I'm reading and then slow down to really hit that last line.
It's a lovely
Let's
cadence.
talk. What'd you say? The cadence?
It's a lovely cadence.
My band in 6th grade was called Cadence Run. That's a little fun fact.
What happened?
We turned into another band called the Skylight.
You're like Andy Dwyer in Parks and Rec. where it's like you've got 50 band names and you just
yeah, right. Mouse rat.
Yeah.
Rat mouse.
Rat mouse.
Okay. This week we should talk about a player who popped up in what was effectively the first big, Cubs offseason rumor, which was funny enough because it was like one day after we talked about on this podcast how there hadn't been that one big early rumor yet. And so I'm just going to read the quote straight from Bruce Levine on 670 The Score, who said, according to MLB insiders I know, people in the know and the other organizations, they feel the Cubs will be there among the top suitors for Dylan Cease. I would say it's highly likely, like for sure, that he's going to be looked at by the Cubs and continue to be pursued. Pretty funny, like stated rumor, which is not atypical from Bruce. I like listening to him because sometimes he'll deliver a rumor like that, and then like the radio host will respond, and then I'll go, well, let me ask you this. What would you say if you know what I'm talking about?
Yep.
And you're like, okay, Bruce, just what do you know?
Yeah.
Like,
what do you know? We know that you know.
There was a guy who was drafted in Chicago and was a free agent. Would you want that guy? He threw 97. That's what
good.
he sounds like.
That's a good impression.
So Dylan Cease, why don't you just talk about how much you do or don't want him, how much he fits or doesn't? I mean, just, general conversation.
Let me start with all of the ways that I would want, that I was pleased to see that rumor. Then we'll get to some of the, there's definitely some hiccups in there, but like one, you love the idea of a premium fastball righty joining this mix of pitchers that the Cubs have. I think that having a variety of stuff in your rotation matters. I don't know that we've yet put our finger on it exactly, as far as like competing over a course of a season, but feels like there's something there. Having swing and miss, I'm sick of that conversation at this point because it's been like the last 10 years of the Chicago Cubs being contact managers. Look, it works for them, so shut up. But that said, missing bats is not a bad thing. So getting him in is also good. And I think that there's the potential there, not to necessarily next level him, because I think he's there, but just to perhaps maybe see a little more consistency in his performance, because he is a guy for whom the peripherals don't always match the results. And you do wonder, I just wonder what's there from the Cubs organization that drafted him, that started his development process, that like sometimes orgs like that have always had stuff in the back of their head. They're like, once he was like physically mature and had his pitches and stuff, we kind of were thinking like this and this and this. So I do wonder if they have a little bit of that where they think they can help his performance a little more than the average team.
Well, let me respond to one part of that.
And last thing, they need to add an impact starting pitcher this offseason period. And he is in that class.
Yes. So I agree with all that. I want to add a little color to the diversification of pitcher types. It kind of reminds me of my banana article from years ago, just like how diversity can help protect you against unforeseen variable changes. And I will say that here's a thing. The Cubs have absolutely succeeded with contact managers. It might be like what they believe as the, sort of competitive advantage or, under market strategy, market inefficiency. But here's the thing of why. Here's a very specific, direct reason why it could help the Cubs to get a guy like Dylan Cease. Let's say Wrigley next year, the wind blows out instead of blows in. And it's nice, or does it for a period of time. If you are relying on a bunch of great contact managers, even if they're great, they might get, a little bit unfairly dinged by changes in the weather. And Cease might lower that variability, maybe not raising the ceiling in the way you want, or you think there's another contact manager who, if everything worked out perfectly, would be better in front of this defense or whatever. But I'm just saying, like, that's the type of reason, or that's an example of a reason why diversification can help. It's like, okay, what if the wind changes next year and you want a guy who's out there every fifth day missing bats instead of inducing weak contact? What if one of your premium defenders or two of them get hurt and you don't have the defense you thought you were building in front of those contact managers, right? And then lastly, what I just said, taking the ball every fifth day, Dylan Cease takes the ball every fifth day. I think it's been 5 straight seasons of 32 starts plus, 4 or 5, something like that. That is very rare. And I think that there's a pretty undervalued or underdiscussed value in the difference of that guy, even if he's not at his best, pitching all 32 starts, then yielding 5 or 6 to whomever is available from AAA that day because his start lines up. So it's like, if you're adding 5 or 6 medium starts versus shifting those 2 guys who are just going to get blown up, or a bullpen game that destroys your whole week, I mean, there's value there too. And so those are the reasons that I think Dylan Cease can be a nice fit. Again, a hard throwing righty mixed in with a bunch of mostly soft tossing lefties,
And also we've seen the Cubs do this, especially under Craig Counsell. They like to play with the rotation a little bit to optimize matchups looking ahead. And it's not hard to imagine there might be some lineups next year that you're like, ooh, be better to get someone like Cease into this series and sort of move guys around.
Now, I want to put a pause on I'm going to do the thing that you hate doing on the like sort of analytical component of the conversation and talk about, I like Dylan Cease.
Because he's got a mustache?
You want to know what? That's not an insignificant part of it.
But because let me fill that out, because it's not literally
that
he's got a mustache. It's sort of the implication of
it's the vibe.
Him, like his vibe. He's a Chicago guy.
Do you guys remember Andrew Chafin? We loved him. Cease is like a fun name. The Cubs drafted him. I don't know. There's something fun there. I think he's going to be.
Hey, I wrote earlier this week. Now, and Cease could arguably fit into this, that, the value of superstars and star players or very good players, it's twofold. It is to help you win games, and that is the most important thing, but it's also to generate interest and attention and positive vibes for your organization. Mm-hmm. And, you're not wrong that when you have a starting pitcher who has the ability to have those like 7 shutout innings with 10 strikeouts type, like strutting around on the mound start, like that's more fun. No offense intended to my ground ball loving pitchers and whatnot, but it's a little more fun to see that, occasionally. So I get that. He's
young, right-handed, hard throwing, makes lots of starts, strikes guys out. Okay. So those are the things that are working for him, and the name recognition. Now let's talk about the red flags, the hurdles that will definitely be there. I'll throw it to you, and I'll fill in any that I think you may.
Yeah, well, I'm going to let you take the performance stuff, because I know you wrote this up. I want to note he's going to get a qualifying offer, and historically, Cubs just don't go after guys with qualifying offers. They've done it about once. Dansby Swanson about it. Now it helps that they will likely have an extra post-second round pick from Kyle Tucker leaving, and we know some years maybe that makes it a little easier to stomach losing your second highest pick. But just broadly speaking, Cubs don't like to do it. And we can dispute or debate if we think that's a good idea or not, but like, we can't ignore that that's a trend that we have seen for sure. The other thing is, is Cease going to get paid at a level commensurate with what teams think he can be? Or is he seen as sort of a bounce back guy because the results weren't super great this past season? And I tend to think it's the former, not the latter. And if that's the case, that's another thing the Cubs just generally don't do. 9-figure deals for starting pitchers. The last one was Yu Darvish, which was 7 years ago. And
they moved out of it 3 years in.
And that was Theo signing it and Jed moving away.
Good point.
Now, granted, there were circumstances there. It's not entirely like, but we have yet to see the Jed Hoyer-led front office seriously engage on a starting pitcher in the 9-figure range. So
yeah. So some of the performance stuff, I mean, it's hard because like the way that WAR for pitchers is calculated is pretty rough, especially at FanGraphs. Yeah, where FIP is the big driver there, and appearances, and because FIP leans heavily on strikeouts, and succeeds there and is often on the mound. He's like a leader in WAR. And that's how Scott Boras is going to frame his little packet that he hands out to teams, strikeouts and WAR. That's what everyone wants. That's what it's going to be and whatever. But I did, and there's a lot you can look into in his numbers. And honestly, when you look at the underlying data, I mean, he doesn't get a lot of ground balls, especially this past season. But there was a lot that didn't concern me as much as I anticipated it. Like his average exit velocity is pretty good. His barrel rate is pretty good. His hard hit rate is pretty good. They're not like, they're like average or slightly better in some circumstances across the board. Now, that said, here's a sentence I wrote, or two sentences, excuse me. And I think it kind of illustrates, like, if you were watching him closely this year, this is probably how you felt. Dylan Cease in 2025 failed to complete 5 innings in 10 of his 32 starts. Okay. So 10 starts were shorter than 5 full innings, which is not great. Of the other 22 outings, he allowed 4+ earned runs, 5 times. So that's not great either. And only one of those were the short ones. So to think about that another way, I'm going to make this understandable now. 15 of his 32 starts last season either featured 4+ earned runs or fewer than 5 complete innings. That's not a great ratio for a guy who expects to have, $100 and whatever $million deal. There's something, I'm not saying like, oh, just get qualified starts. Like that's not the point. And we might believe that he can deliver more, but we are talking about a guy who won fewer than half of his starts last year were not good. They were starts where you go, well, he didn't really give us a chance to win today. And you can't just throw that out because it's like, but he strikes out a lot of guys. Like, yeah, I know, but he needs to turn that into results that lead to wins. That's just one factor. So that kind of concerns me a little bit.
Well, and I'm glad you brought that up because we don't talk about that enough with starting pitchers or relievers, really. We look at, especially when we have available to us the full complement of stats for a season, we kind of like, oh, here's the full performance. I think there is value in going outing by outing and looking like, there's a difference between a guy who, if he's a reliever, say, and he's got 50 appearances, he's got one absolute implosion outing where he gets obliterated and 49 scoreless versus a guy who's allowed 2 runs like 7 times. They might have the same ERA, but give me that first guy. Okay.
100% of the time.
Which is, by the way, I kind of want the Cubs to pick up Andrew Kittredge's option because that's how he got to his numbers with the Cubs, basically. And so with Cease, I do think you do wonder, especially because it's not like it's just not necessarily a statistical quirk, right? It could be how a guy prepares, how like he might have good days and bad days. Like that might be baked into a player's sort of nature. And so I don't know, you'd have to drill down on that a little bit more to figure out, okay, what spurred it for him this year, but it shouldn't be a non-consideration.
No. Now, with all of that said, let's take a look at what was arguably like his best season. He has a couple that could qualify. 2022 was a particularly good one, 32 starts, 184 innings, 2.20 ERA, 2.7 xERA, 3.10 FIP. That was a strikeout rate of 30.4%. And that wasn't even his career best. He did 31.9% the year prior. I mean, this is a guy, we all know Dylan Cease. I mean, we not only did the Cubs draft him, he was then traded to the south side of this city. So we all saw what he could do, a little bit more closely than usual. It is still a very exciting guy, but I do think I got to say this part, which we haven't really gotten into yet. I think it's equally likely that you were right. I think you brought this up on the last pod that the Cubs are going to be a little bit more interested in trading for one of those 4 starters, Edward Cabrera, Sandy Alcantara, Mackenzie Gore, maybe a little less so, but possibly, and Joe Ryan. Those are the sort of guys that they might be interested in. And then in free agency, there are some other options. Maybe they really like Jack Flaherty. I can see being like a Dylan Cease light type of approach. But it's not at all inconceivable to me. And in fact, I hate to ruin this segment. It feels a little bit more likely to me that this is just a little bit of leveragey, not planted. I'm sure Bruce heard exactly what he heard and reported it accurately and whatnot. But I'm just saying it benefits the Cubs for other teams and other agents to think that they are interested in Dylan Cease. And there's a lot of obvious connections to make there from where he was drafted to where he played to the type of player he is that make that really easy to sell. It's like a little too easy. And that's what made my alarm bells go off and go, is this real or is this what they want everyone to think?
Because it helps Cease and Boris too.
Oh, I mean, sure, it helps them too.
That's
Absolutely.
Of course always true, but yeah. And I think I go back to the point we talked about last time, and we're going to talk about every single pod, is that CBA expires after next year. And I do think there's going to be more reticence from the Cubs and some other organizations to lock down 5, 6, 7-year deals. Also of note, Dylan Cease turns 30 in December, which is not old, especially for starting pitchers. We see a window of really good performance still from starting pitchers through 34 or 35. But Cease is a guy for whom his success. There's a little
because of the mustache.
I like the mustache. So much of his success is predicated on velocity and stuff. And his velocity was a career high, 97 on the fastball. But he hasn't ever shown, when he's dipped, does he still have a way to perform and succeed? We just don't know. And that can happen. That fall off doesn't happen for every guy. Like Verlander is still throwing whatever in his late 30s.
Darvish, he's fallen off now, but he had a run.
Yeah, he carried it for a very long time.
Yeah. Wait, I have to add one more factor here. There's also the possibility, because we have to talk about this with everyone, but especially a guy like Dylan Cease, especially when he's represented by Scott Boras, especially when he's when he is like a former superstar coming off a mediocre year, and there's a 1-year sort of off ramp for a lot of players and teams because of the CBA. Yep. Could he do a 1-year pillow deal? Yes, it's possible that he does. I don't think he'll need to do that, but maybe he's like, listen, if I go out there and dominate for someone, I'm going to get $250 million next winter. Okay, fine. Maybe. Now the complicating factor there, this cuts both ways though, is the qualifying offer, which will attach him to draft pick compensation. Now that is a heftier price to pay when you're getting a guy for just 1 year. And it has to factor in, and that's a big deal. And the Cubs have, they're not the only team, but they are certainly in the group of teams that clearly values that at a premium and bakes that into their...
They wouldn't give Alex Bregman an opt-out after 1 year, not exclusively because of the qualifying offer, but like that was a factor.
Yeah. Now that is the downside. The upshot is that they are pretty unlikely to sign Kyle Tucker and will be gaining a pick when he signs elsewhere. And thus it's still a lost pick because you would have it. It's not like, but maybe you go, well, relative to neutral, we're kind of still getting our one extra pick this year, so that cuts both ways. I'm sure all things considered, the Cubs might love to have Dylan Cease on a 1-year deal in some ways, but I don't think it's going to play out that way.
No, I think
he's just going to get a multi-year deal. So
I think he's, option 1, he's likely to just get 5 or 6 years. And then 2 is an opt-out after 1 on a 4-year deal.
Yeah, exactly. But I just thought it was worth saying, especially because the qualifying offer thing, it is important to remember that the Cubs will get one for Tucker. So, that changes the calculus a little bit.
Unless Tucker accepts his qualifying offer.
Now that would be wonderful.
Can you imagine the straining we would all do to be like, okay, what's wrong? Like what,
I mean, it would be would you be more shocked at, no, that would be more shocking. But when Marcus Stroman opted out, we were like,
that was pretty darn surprising.
Like,
this would be more shocking, but
did they spend that money? They went on a wild spending spree.
Needed that cash back.
Yeah.
I'm still waiting for them to spend the Cody Bellinger money. Yeah. Okay. This is the Cubs. This is Bleacher Nation Cubs podcast.
That should be our outro should be okay. Because that's how the Cubs make you feel sometimes. Okay.
Okay. It's the Cubs, Bleacher Nation Cubs podcast. Ankin Law, 312-6 million injury law made personal. They are our sponsor. Thank you. No begrudging trail off in that. No. I'm Brett. That's Michael. Read our stuff at Bleacher Nation. Subscribe, rate, review. Check us out on YouTube. All that good stuff. It helps. And we appreciate you. And it's about to be 60 minutes. Look at that. Just under an hour. Okay, I got to go. Bye.